In July 1946, a Hungarian woman named Ilona carried 4 trillion pengő to the baker. She left with half a loaf of bread. By the time she walked home, 17 minutes, the price had doubled again. Her remaining money couldn't buy a matchstick. Ilona had gold, hidden beneath the floorboards of her apartment in Budapest. 20 gold coins her father had buried before the war. She dug them up that August, certain they would save her family. 3 weeks later, Soviet authorities arrested her brother for economic crimes. Someone had reported the gold. The coins were confiscated. Her brother was sent to a labor camp. He never returned. Gold was supposed to protect her. Instead, it destroyed everything she had left. This is the story they don't tell you about safe havens. The story of what actually survives when empires fall and what gets you killed. What are you really holding on to? There is a vault beneath the Federal Reserve Bank of New York that holds more gold than any other place on Earth. 80 feet below street level, behind a 90-ton steel door, sits approximately 6,000 tons of gold bars, worth over $500 billion at current prices. Most of it doesn't belong to America. It belongs to foreign governments who believe that storing their wealth in the world as a financial capital would keep it safe. They believed in gold. Humanity has worshipped gold for over 5,000 years. The Egyptians buried it with their pharaohs. The Spanish murdered entire civilizations to possess it. The British built an empire with gold-backed currency at its center. Every generation has been taught the same lesson. When paper burns, gold endures. But here's what they don't teach you in the history books. Gold is a trap. On April 5th, 1933, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. With the stroke of a pen, he made it illegal for American citizens to own gold coins, gold bullion, or gold certificates. The penalty: up to 10 years in prison and a $10,000 fine, equivalent to $230,000 today. Americans had 25 days to surrender their gold to the Federal Reserve. The government paid them $20.67 per ounce. It was not a request. It was a demand backed by federal law enforcement. And here's the part that should disturb you. Most people complied. Within weeks, the Treasury had collected over 500 tons of gold from ordinary citizens. Grandmothers turned in wedding rings. Businessmen surrendered coins their fathers had saved for generations. The gold that was supposed to protect them became government property overnight. Then, 9 months later, Roosevelt raised the official gold price to $35 per ounce. The government had just stolen 69% of the purchasing power from everyone who followed the law. Those who hid their gold, they became criminals. And for the next 41 years, until 1974, owning gold bullion remained illegal for American citizens. This was not ancient history. This was your great-grandparents' reality. But America wasn't alone. In September 1931, Britain abandoned the gold standard entirely. The pound sterling, the world's reserve currency for over a century, was suddenly backed by nothing but faith. Overnight, British citizens watched their stable currency lose 25% of its value against gold. Those holding gold couldn't spend it. Those holding pounds lost a quarter of their savings. The lesson? When governments face financial catastrophe, they don't protect your wealth. They confiscate it. Even the great Charles de Gaulle learned this truth. In the 1960s, the French president didn't trust America's promise that dollars were as good as gold. So he began aggressively converting France's dollar reserves into physical gold and demanding shipment to Paris. De Gaulle was right to be suspicious. By 1971, Nixon would close the gold window entirely, proving that America had been lying about its gold reserves for years. But here's what de Gaulle didn't anticipate. The gold he accumulated became a strategic vulnerability. France couldn't eat it, couldn't build factories with it, couldn't pay soldiers with ingots. When the economy needed stimulus, gold sat uselessly in vaults while French industry stagnated. Gold promises security. But security is an illusion when you're holding an asset that governments can outlaw, confiscate, and reprice at will. Ask yourself, if the most powerful nation on earth, the land of the free, made gold ownership a federal crime for 4 decades, what makes you think it won't happen again? The next financial crisis won't look like 1933. It will be faster, more digital, more sophisticated, and gold sitting in a safe, glittering and useless, won't save you from what's coming. So if gold isn't the answer, what is? The answer lies in understanding what actually kills empires. And that pattern has already begun. Every empire believes it is eternal. Every empire is wrong. The Romans thought they would rule forever. The Spanish believed God had chosen them. The Ottomans called their domain the eternal state. Each one collapsed, and each one followed the same pattern. A pattern so consistent, so predictable, that historians have mapped it across 3,000 years of human civilization. There are 5 triggers. When all 5 appear simultaneously, collapse becomes inevitable. Not possible. Inevitable. Trigger 1. Debt exceeds the capacity to repay. In 1557, King Philip II of Spain did something unprecedented. He declared bankruptcy, the most powerful empire on earth, flush with silver from the Americas, admitted it could not pay its debts. It would happen again in 1560 and 1575 and 1596 and 1607 and 1627 and 1647. 7 defaults in 90 years. Each time Spanish leaders promised reform. Each time they borrowed more. The silver kept flowing from Peru and Mexico, but it flowed straight through to foreign creditors. Spain became a pipeline, not a treasury. By 1700, the Spanish Empire was a hollow shell, still claiming vast territories, but unable to defend them, develop them, or even feed its own people. The debt had become the empire. Trigger 2. Currency debasement accelerates. The Roman denarius was once pure silver. In 64 AD, Emperor Nero reduced its silver content to 94%. A small adjustment, barely noticeable. By 268 AD, the denarius contained just 0.5% silver. It was bronze with a silver wash, a lie pretending to be money. Roman soldiers, paid in these worthless coins, began demanding payment in goods instead. Trade networks collapsed. Cities that had thrived for centuries emptied within a generation. The currency, meant to facilitate commerce, had destroyed it. Debasement is never announced. It is always discovered. Too late. Trigger 3. Wealth inequality reaches breaking point. On October 5th, 1789, 6,000 Parisian women marched 12 miles in the rain to Versailles. They were hungry, their children were hungry, and they knew that inside the palace, Marie Antoinette's court had just hosted a lavish banquet for military officers. The French nobility owned 25% of all land, but paid almost no taxes. The burden fell entirely on peasants who could barely afford bread. This arrangement had persisted for centuries, until it didn't. Within 4 years, the king was dead, the queen was dead, thousands of nobles were dead, and France had torn itself apart in a revolution that would reshape the entire world. Inequality doesn't cause collapse by itself, but it removes the social cohesion needed to survive crisis. When the bottom has nothing left to lose, they stop protecting the system. Trigger 4. Military overextension drains the treasury. The Ottoman Empire once stretched from Vienna to Yemen, from Algeria to Iraq. Maintaining this territory required constant warfare on multiple fronts, against Persia, against Russia, against Austria, against local rebellions. By the 1800s, the Ottomans were spending more on their military than they collected in taxes. The difference came from foreign loans, primarily from Britain and France. These allies were happy to lend money at interest rates that guaranteed the empire's slow strangulation. When the Ottoman Empire finally collapsed after World War I, it had been dying for a century. The military that was supposed to protect the empire had consumed it. Trigger 5. Trust in institutions collapses. In November 1923, a German housewife needed 200 billion marks to buy a single loaf of bread. Prices doubled every few hours. Workers demanded to be paid twice daily so they could spend their wages before they became worthless. But Weimar's hyperinflation wasn't just an economic crisis, it was a trust crisis. Germans stopped believing in their government, their banks, their currency, their future. A generation that had sacrificed everything in World War I watched their savings evaporate. That loss of faith created a vacuum, and into that vacuum stepped extremists promising order, revenge, and restoration. You know what happened next? 5 triggers: debt, debasement, inequality, overextension, distrust. When these forces align, empires don't reform. They shatter. So what did the survivors do? The ones who saw it coming. How did they escape? On the morning of June 18th, 1815, Nathan Rothschild stood on the London Stock Exchange floor and began selling. His face betrayed nothing. But the other traders watched him carefully. Rothschild had a network. Couriers, ships, carrier pigeons that delivered news faster than any government. If Nathan was selling, something terrible must have happened at Waterloo. Panic spread. British bonds collapsed. Traders dumped everything. Then, at the last moment, Rothschild's agents began buying. Quietly, systematically, everything they could get. Napoleon had lost. Wellington had won. And Nathan Rothschild, who knew hours before anyone else, had just made the equivalent of $600 million in a single day. Gold didn't make the Rothschilds wealthy. Information did. Relationships did. A network that spanned 5 countries and could move faster than armies. That was the asset no government could confiscate. The family had learned this lesson decades earlier, when they were still living in Frankfurt's Jewish ghetto. Meyer Rothschild sent his 5 sons to 5 different cities: London, Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt. Whatever happened to one branch, the others would survive. Whatever fell in one country could be rebuilt from another. Diversification wasn't about asset classes. It was about geography, skills, and human connections. This pattern repeats across every collapse in history. On August 4th, 1972, Ugandan dictator Idi Amin gave the country's 80,000 South Asian residents 90 days to leave. They could take what they could carry, nothing else. Businesses they had built for generations, confiscated, properties, bank accounts, inventories, gone. 90 days to abandon everything. But here's what the history books often miss. Within a decade, many of these expelled Ugandans had rebuilt their wealth in Britain, Canada, and the United States. Some became more successful than they had ever been in Uganda. How? They carried skills that couldn't be confiscated: accounting, engineering, medicine, trade networks, with family members scattered across 3 continents. A 19-year-old who left Kampala with nothing but a suitcase could become a millionaire in London. Not despite starting over, but because he knew how to build something from nothing. The gold they left behind. The Ugandan government melted it down. It was gone within months. 4 years later, another exodus tested the same principle. In April 1975, Saigon fell. Over 130,000 Vietnamese fled in the initial evacuation, many on overcrowded boats with no clear destination. They arrived in America with no money, no English, no legal status beyond refugee papers. 30 years later, Vietnamese Americans had a median household income above the national average. Their children attended elite universities at rates that defied every statistical prediction. Entire industries, nail salons, fishing fleets, technology startups, bear their fingerprints. They brought something more valuable than gold: an unbreakable work ethic, tight family networks, and skills that translated across borders. The same story played out in Hungary in 1956. When Soviet tanks rolled into Budapest, 200,000 Hungarians fled west. Some tried to smuggle gold coins sewn into coat linings. Border guards knew this trick. They searched refugees thoroughly. Many were caught, arrested, sent back. But the engineer who could design factory equipment, the doctor who could practice medicine in Vienna, the professor who could teach mathematics in New York, they walked across the border with nothing but their knowledge. And their knowledge walked with them. There is a pattern here, and it is not subtle. In every collapse across every century, the survivors share one trait. They invested in assets that could move. Skills, relationships, knowledge, networks that span borders. Gold is heavy. Gold is visible. Gold attracts exactly the wrong kind of attention when governments become desperate. But what you know, what you can do, that travels with you wherever you go. The question is, what do you know that the world will still need when the old systems fail? In 1960, a Cuban accountant named Jorge Mascanosa arrived in Miami with $40 in his pocket. He had left behind a comfortable life in Havana, a house, a car, a promising career. Castro's revolution had taken everything. His bank accounts were frozen. His property was nationalized. The gold his family had saved for decades, seized by revolutionary committees who went door to door searching for hoarded wealth. Jorge took a job as a milkman, then a shoe salesman, then a construction worker. 25 years later, he was worth over $100 million as his company, matchstick, would become one of the largest infrastructure contractors in the United States. His sons would inherit not gold bars, but a business empire built entirely from skills their father carried in his head. The Cuban exile community in Miami has produced more self-made millionaires per capita than almost any immigrant group in American history. They arrived with nothing. Many couldn't speak English. Most had no legal documentation beyond refugee papers. But they brought something Castro couldn't confiscate: the knowledge of how to run businesses, manage finances, and build organizations. Within one generation, they transformed a sleepy Florida beach town into the commercial capital of Latin America. This is not an exception. This is the rule. When Soviet Jews began emigrating to Israel in the 1970s and 1980s, they faced a humiliating reality. Engineers drove taxis. Physicists washed dishes. Doctors worked as hospital orderlies because their credentials weren't recognized. The Soviet Union had stripped them of everything. They couldn't take money. They couldn't take property. Many were allowed only a single suitcase, but they could take their minds. By the 1990s, these same immigrants had helped transform Israel into a global technology powerhouse. The startup nation was built substantially by people who had arrived with nothing, except decades of Soviet scientific training that their oppressors couldn't erase. Russian wasn't useful in Tel Aviv, but differential equations, systems engineering, the discipline of solving complex problems under impossible constraints. Those skills translated perfectly. The same pattern emerged in the Iranian diaspora after 1979. When the Shah fell, wealthy Iranians tried to smuggle out gold, jewelry, and cash. Many were caught at the airport. Revolutionary guards confiscated millions in assets from fleeing families. Those who hid gold in their homes became targets. Neighbors informed on neighbors, and the revolutionary committees knew exactly what to look for. But the Iranian surgeon who resettled in Los Angeles, her hands were her fortune. The engineer who rebuilt his career in London, his expertise couldn't be searched at customs. Today, Iranian Americans are among the most educated and highest earning immigrant groups in the United States. They didn't achieve this by smuggling gold. They achieved it by carrying skills that no revolution could seize. Perhaps no recent example is more stark than Venezuela. As the Bolivar collapsed in the 2010s, Venezuelan doctors discovered something remarkable. Their skills had become the most valuable currency in the country. While others lined up for hours hoping to buy flour, physicians traded consultations for food, housing, and safe passage out of the country. A surgeon in Caracas could negotiate an apartment. A pediatrician could secure her family's escape to Colombia. Medical knowledge, something completely intangible, became more liquid than gold, more valuable than cash, more portable than any physical asset. The doctors who stayed saved lives and fed their families. The doctors who left rebuilt their careers abroad, often within months of arriving. What did gold holders do? They waited. They hid. They hoped the crisis would pass. Many are still waiting. Here is the uncomfortable truth that no financial advisor will tell you. In a true collapse, your resume is worth more than your safe. But skills alone aren't enough. You need the right skills. And you need something to attach them to. Land, resources, productive capacity. That brings us to the most dangerous asset of all. In the winter of 1930, Soviet officials arrived in Ukrainian villages with a simple question. How much grain do you have? The kulaks, peasant farmers who had managed to accumulate modest land holdings, told the truth. They had worked hard. They had saved. They had bought a few extra acres, perhaps a cow or two. By the standards of rural Ukraine, they were successful. It was a death sentence. Stalin had declared war on the kulaks as a class. Their crime? Owning land. Their punishment? Deportation, imprisonment, execution. Between 1930 and 1933, Soviet authorities dekulakized approximately 1.8 million people. They were stripped of everything: farms, livestock, homes, tools, and shipped to labor camps in Siberia. Hundreds of thousands died, their land was collectivized, the grain was seized, and the resulting famine killed somewhere between 3.5 and 7 million Ukrainians. The kulaks had done everything right by traditional measures of wealth. They had invested in productive land. They had built something tangible, and that tangibility made them visible, identifiable, and ultimately expendable. Land doesn't move, and when the wrong government takes power, neither do you. This lesson repeated itself 70 years later in Zimbabwe. In 2000, Robert Mugabe launched his fast-track land reform program. White commercial farmers who had operated properties for generations, some for over a century, were given days to vacate. War veterans and political allies seized farms at gunpoint. Legal titles meant nothing. Compensation was a joke. Within 5 years, Zimbabwe's agricultural output had collapsed by 60%. A country that once exported food became dependent on international aid. The farmers who stayed faced violence, imprisonment, or death. Many who fled lost everything they had built over lifetimes. Their land was productive. Their land was valuable. Their land was exactly what the desperate government needed to reward its supporters. Visibility had made them targets. But land's danger isn't only political. Sometimes the economics turn against you. During Ireland's Great Famine of the 1840s, landlords discovered a horrifying paradox. They owned vast estates. They controlled thousands of acres. On paper, they were wealthy beyond imagination. In reality, they were trapped. Their tenants couldn't pay rent. They were starving. The land couldn't be sold. Who would buy farmland during a famine? The crops had failed. Blight had destroyed the potato harvest for years running. And British law made landlords responsible for the poor relief of tenants on their property. Some landlords went bankrupt trying to feed their tenants. Others evicted starving families to escape the financial burden. Many estates that had been in families for centuries were sold for pennies or simply abandoned. Land rich, cash poor, option zero. Yet land isn't always a trap. Context matters enormously. After World War II, American occupation forces imposed radical land reform on Japan. Giant estates were broken up. Absentee landlords were forced to sell at fixed prices. Tenant farmers suddenly became smallholders. The former landlords lost nearly everything. But the new small farmers, they gained security, independence, and a stake in Japan's reconstruction. Within a generation, Japan had transformed from a feudal agricultural society into an industrial powerhouse. The difference? The land was redistributed, not destroyed. Those who worked it kept working it. Productivity survived the political upheaval. Here is what history teaches about land. It can save you or destroy you, depending entirely on circumstances you cannot control. Own land quietly, in a stable jurisdiction, with productive capacity, and it may sustain your family for generations. Own land visibly, in a turbulent nation, as a symbol of wealth, and it paints a target on your back. So what do the truly wealthy do? The ones who have survived not one collapse but many? They don't think about assets. They think about options. In 1944, while bombs fell on Europe and empires burned, one Swedish family was quietly getting richer. The Wallenbergs had survived World War I. They had survived the Great Depression. Now, as Nazi Germany collapsed and Soviet armies advanced westward, they were positioning themselves to survive whatever came next. Their secret wasn't gold. It wasn't land. It wasn't even money in the traditional sense. It was optionality. The Wallenberg family controlled banks in Sweden, a neutral country that neither the Allies nor the Axis could touch. They held stakes in companies across multiple industries, manufacturing, shipping, telecommunications. They maintained relationships with governments on all sides of the conflict, and they had family members strategically positioned in different nations, ready to act depending on which way the wind blew. When the war ended, the Wallenbergs emerged stronger than before. Their neutrality had protected their core assets. Their diversification had ensured that no single catastrophe could wipe them out. Their relationships had given them access to reconstruction opportunities across the continent. Today, the Wallenberg family controls assets worth over $300 billion. They have survived 2 world wars, multiple financial crises, and the complete reshaping of the global order, not once, but repeatedly. They didn't bet on gold, they bet on flexibility. This is the strategy that all money understands instinctively. Survival isn't about finding the one perfect asset. It's about ensuring you have options no matter what happens. The Swiss built an entire nation on this principle. During World War II, Switzerland was surrounded by Axis powers. Germany could have invaded at any moment, yet the Swiss survived, not through military strength, but through strategic usefulness. Swiss banks held accounts for both sides. Swiss factories produced goods for whoever paid. Swiss diplomats maintained relationships with everyone. The country made itself too valuable to destroy and too neutral to threaten. The gold in Swiss vaults was never the point. The point was the system, a jurisdiction that protected wealth regardless of who won the war, a place where money could hide while empires burned. After the war, this same neutrality attracted capital from around the world. The Swiss didn't just store gold, they stored options, and they charged handsomely for the privilege. Singapore understood this lesson and built something even more efficient. When Lee Kuan Yew transformed Singapore from a swampy trading post into a global financial center, he wasn't trying to compete with Switzerland's gold vaults. He was competing for something more valuable: the trust of wealthy Asians who needed a safe harbor. Singapore offered rule of law, English-speaking courts, low taxes, and complete discretion. It became the place where Indonesian tycoons, Chinese industrialists, and Indian billionaires could park their wealth beyond the reach of their home governments. Today, Singapore manages over $4 trillion in assets, not because it has gold, because it has stability, predictability, and options. The pattern is unmistakable. The truly wealthy don't hoard one asset. They distribute themselves across systems. This reality became brutally clear in Argentina in December 2001, when the government announced the Corralito, freezing all bank accounts and limiting withdrawals to $250 per week. Middle-class Argentines watched their savings become hostages. They couldn't pay bills. They couldn't buy food. They couldn't access money they had earned and deposited in supposedly safe institutions. But wealthy Argentines, many had already moved funds to Uruguay, Miami, or Switzerland. They had seen the warning signs, the debt spiral, the currency peg under pressure, and they had created options before the trap closed. The same scene repeated in Cyprus in March 2013. When Cypriot banks failed, the European Union imposed a bail-in. Deposits over $100,000 were partially confiscated to save the banking system. Ordinary citizens learned overnight that their savings weren't really theirs. They were just unsecured loans to institutions that could fail. Those with accounts solely in Cyprus lost up to 47.5% of their savings. Those with assets distributed across multiple jurisdictions lost nothing. The lesson? The wealthy don't ask, "What should I buy?" They ask, "Where should I be?" Citizenship, residency, banking relationships, business structures, multiple passports, multiple jurisdictions, multiple options. That is the real safe haven, not a metal. A strategy, but time is running out to implement it.